When you feel that your body is a prison, it changes everything. It changes the way you interact with the world. As a lot of you know, I was recently diagnosed with hypermobile Ehlers Danlos syndrome, mast cell activation syndrome, and postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome after 32 and a half years of feeling sick and in pain and just desperately searching for answers. I have two goals for this video. The first is to share all of my symptoms and how they changed from childhood to adulthood in case those of you out there also have an illness and you just can't figure out what it is. I actually first heard of all three of these diseases from my Instagram followers after I posted a list of my symptoms. You guys were the first ones to diagnose me before I could ever find a doctor that could do it. So if I can return the favor and possibly help someone else who's suffering and save them years or even decades of searching for answers, then, I mean, mission accomplished. And my second goal is to raise awareness of what it's like to live with an invisible illness in an able-bodied world. And that's not to minimize what people with visible disability or illnesses go through. That's a whole separate set of challenges. But my specific illnesses and disabilities are totally invisible to the outside world, and that presents a unique set of challenges. I can't start this video without saying a massive thank you to the subscribers and the Instagram followers who first told me that they thought I had these diseases. I've been sick my whole life, and I've specifically been experiencing significantly worse symptoms in the past 6 years. It all just seemed like a bunch of random symptoms that were completely unrelated, but in the past 4 years, since 2018, I've been experiencing significant pain, which really started my whole journey looking for answers. I've seen over 20 doctors, I've seen 11 physical therapists just in the past 3 years alone, and out of all of those people, only one of them was able to recognize these conditions, but a lot of you did. It's taken me about 10 months before I could even find a doctor that could diagnose me. I'm really lucky to have a more mild case compared to a lot of people out there, which is why it took me so long until 2018 when I started experiencing really crippling pain before I even, really started looking for answers and possibly thinking that all these symptoms might be connected. Living with a chronic illness and chronic pain can be so incredibly isolating, but you guys have made it less isolating for me. So many of you reached out and shared your stories, shared treatments, shared little tips and tricks that have helped you, and just shared emotional support in general, and that has meant more to me than you will ever know. I want to say a specific thank you to Isabel, who's a YouTube subscriber, and Kaylee, who's an Instagram follower. Between the two of them, I basically got like an entire plan to manage my diseases. They both have the same diagnosis, and they reached out to share books, gear like braces and compression socks, electrolyte supplements, affirmations, emotional support, and even a full team of doctors and specialists in LA that can treat me. And I mean, to Isabel and Kaylee, like, I owe you everything. So I want to pay it forward and do the same for someone else, which is why I'm thinking that I'll probably be documenting, different treatments, medications, supplements, lifestyle changes, and things like that along the way in hopes that it helps someone out there who's also suffering from the same thing. As overwhelming as it is to now have the grief settle in of having lifelong, progressive, and genetic diseases, I at least can start getting answers and treatments, and that is the first step to healing. I've never in my life had a day that's symptom-free, and now I might one day know what it's like to feel good and like to live a normal life. And that is because of all the people who reached out to me and tried to help me along the way and listened to my symptoms and shared their stories and helped me put the pieces together. So a massive thank you to everyone who's reached out to share information and also just to share love and emotional support. I truly am overwhelmed with gratitude for just the wonderful community that we have here. So now let's talk about what I've been diagnosed with and what it all means. Keep in mind, I am just starting to learn about all of this, and I have a very, very limited amount of information, but I do just want to share a little bit so you can have an understanding. And my doctor gave me a very nice little printout. So basically, there are several different types of Ehlers Danlos syndrome. I have type 3, which is hypermobile. Simply put, EDS is a connective tissue disorder, and what happens with hypermobile EDS is, think of my fist as a joint. Your joint is so hypermobile or so flexible that your muscles around that joint have to work overtime to try to keep that joint in place, which means every muscle in my body is hard as a rock and so painful. Hi, Future Kate here. I just wanted to jump in and add some clips throughout this video because it's been a month since I filmed this video, a month since I got my diagnosis, and I have a little bit of extra information that I've learned and a little bit more context I can add. Might mean that the video is a little bit choppy, but hopefully it means that you have some extra information that's helpful to you or potentially a loved one that may be struggling with the same disorders or think that you may have them. So the first thing I wanted to mention that I forgot in this video is that there's currently no genetic test for hypermobile EDS or EDS type 3, but there are genetic tests for the other types like classic or vascular. Instead, if you think that you have hypermobile EDS, it's all just an in-office test or a clinical diagnosis. Basically, your physician or specialist, whoever you see, will ask you a bunch of questions. They will listen to all of your symptoms. They will walk you through all of your medical history. They'll ask you some weird questions you've never thought of, and they'll have you perform a few different kind of bendy exercises to see how hypermobile you are. For example, I'm not gonna push myself when I do these things, but basically one test that you do is you can touch your thumb to your wrist. So I don't know if you can see that. That's another example of hypermobility. They'll have you bend over, touch your toes. They will look at your ankles to see the way your ankles move. They'll look at your knees to see if your kneecaps stay on track. Move your hips around to see how hypermobile your hips are. They'll stretch your skin to see if you have stretchy skin. They'll look at your gums. They'll have you perform different neurological tests, like if you close your eyes and touch your nose. That's an example. I failed that test. I wasn't able to touch the tip of my nose. I went this way. That was a sign of some potential neurological issues that are associated with EDS. So basically, the only way to determine if you have it right now is through the clinical diagnosis. However, there's a team of researchers that's been working on the genetic marker for hypermobile EDS, and they just posted a podcast in August that I will leave on the screen and I will link in the description box below. They've said that they've found the genetic markers for EDS type 3, and they're basically waiting on, I don't know if it's a peer review or something like that to get published, but they also said that they found it in 2021 and they still haven't published it. So, you know, don't get your hopes up praying that there's going to be a genetic test really soon. You know, these things can take a long time. And then mast cell activation syndrome, or MCAS, is basically when every cell in your body, every organ system in your body is under an allergy attack. And MCAS affects every single organ system from the brain to the heart, the lungs, the blood, your bones, muscles, and joints, your mood, your skin, your stomach, your mouth, your eyes, your ears, everything in your body. Something I forgot to mention is that mast cell activation syndrome can be triggered by 100 different things. Your environment, cleaning products, dogs, cats, pollen, dust, ragweed, mold. Some people are even triggered just by the sunlight, so really no two patients are the same. And that's why it can take a really long time to figure out how to get your mast cell activation syndrome under control, because every person's different. Every person has different triggers. They also say that food is a really huge component of it. So diet and lifestyle changes are really essential if you want to manage your symptoms. What happens with people with EDS and MCAS is our joints that are being super flexible, that sort of like flexibility doesn't hurt us, it doesn't cause pain. Our body still recognizes that as an injury. Even though I can't feel that pain and I won't experience any swelling, my body still recognizes that as an injury. And so those mast cells flare up. And that's what happens with every joint in my body, within every organ system. So the EDS can trigger the MCAS. So my understanding is that with POTS, the blood pools in your lower body. Basically what that means is my brain and my pituitary gland that produces hormones can't get enough blood. So that can cause unexplained fainting, it can cause low blood pressure, irregular heartbeat, all of which I've experienced. Again, I'm really just starting to get familiar with this, just having been diagnosed a week ago. So, you know, take everything with a grain of salt, do your own research, but that's just my general understanding of what these are. So the primary issue that I have is mast cell activation syndrome. Essentially, every cell in my body has been undergoing an allergy attack since I was born. And that's why every single thing in my life has been so affected. So the printout says, mast cells are immune cells that detect danger signals from the environment, including smells, temperature, pressure, injury/stretch/sprains, food, and taste. The mast cells are located everywhere in the body. And in Ehlers Danlos syndrome, or EDS, mast cells are often activated from a very young age, as young as the first year of life, a condition called mast cell activation syndrome. So now I'm gonna list my personal symptoms. Joint degeneration, spinal stenosis, arthritis, a herniated disc at L5-S1, hypermobile joints, severe low back pain, especially on my SI on the right side, severe knee pain, severe TMJ, jaw clicking, shooting head pains, teeth grinding, fatigue, brain fog, ultra sensitivity to light and sound. I have a hip labrum tear on my left that really isn't symptomatic. I had a hip labrum tear on my right that I had hip surgery for. I had a hip arthroscopy in 2019. Mystery fainting, low blood pressure, sensitivity to heat, heart palpitations, irregular heartbeat, IT band syndrome, especially on my left leg, an extremely hypermobile patella, meaning that my kneecap kind of falls off track and causes a lot of pain, mild scoliosis, a tilted uneven pelvis, severe allergies, seasonal allergies especially, but also dogs, cats, mold, ragweed, dust, and pollen. I have asthma, acid reflux, heartburn, insomnia, sleep apnea, weak teeth enamel, a weak immune system, and trouble building muscle and strength. So when you look at that, it's kind of like, damn, like that's a lot of symptoms you've had your whole life. But the thing is, I never really experienced them all at one time. And the way that these diseases work is that they actually change throughout your life. So for example, when I was a kid, it was really bad allergies and asthma, and that constantly took me out of school. But I don't have asthma anymore, and now I have really severe chronic pain and fatigue. So there can be a lot of mind games involved because you're kind of just like constantly sick with different things that constantly change. And so I never put the pieces together that there actually might just be like one thing contributing to everything. So now that we got the symptoms out of the way, let's talk about my story, and then I'm gonna move into the more emotional aspect of really how this has affected my life. I don't wanna be totally superfluous here and just like share my story for the sake of sharing it. I wanna share it so that if someone else is suffering, if you or your loved one, or maybe even your child is presenting a similar story, you may be able to get them answers sooner than I was able to get. So I was always a sickly kid. I had such severe allergy reactions that my doctors put me on weekly allergy shots. I got 3 shots total every single week for about 7 years. I remember getting mono in 4th grade, and I was so sick, I missed a month of school. And I was missing school so constantly, it really impacted my ability to make friends. People thought I was faking it because I was really vocal about how I didn't like school. I didn't like my teachers. I felt like I had a hard time fitting in. So people didn't really seem to trust that I was actually sick. I really struggled to do activities in school. I went to the same school from 5th grade all the way to 12th grade, and we were all required to do after school activities until about 6 p.m. every day. And I really struggled to stay awake in class. I'm so sensitive to light that the fluorescent lights in my high school would just automatically put me to sleep. I don't think I remembered or learned a single thing in those classes. So school for me was really just about getting by. Honestly, I kind of just assumed that everyone else had the same experience and we just didn't really talk about it. So in middle school, it was really all about allergies and asthma for me. And then as I got into high school, I was really experiencing the sensitivity to light and sound. I still had the allergies, but the asthma kind of resolved itself unless I was sick or I kind of ran really hard in soccer practice. I specifically remember my soccer coaches telling me that I was faking it every time I took out my inhaler because I was having an asthma attack. Terrible. I started getting my first TMJ symptoms, a lot of jaw clicking. My jaw would become unhinged. It would get stuck in place. They said that was pretty common, probably due to stress, so I didn't really think anything of it. They used a TENS machine or something like it, which is basically where there's like electrical currents and it kind of jolts your muscle and tries to relax it. That never worked. Again, I just pushed through it. When I got to college at NYU, things got a lot worse. My freshman year, I got mono again, and I missed 1 week of school and my conservatory kicked me out. I was at a musical theater conservatory called Cap 21. Because it's a conservatory, you're not allowed to miss more than a few days of school in a row. They told me I would no longer be able to participate in the freshman year class. I ended up finishing my freshman year of NYU only taking 2 academic classes in my first semester, and then in my second semester taking more academic classes, but not being able to study what my major was supposed to be. And again, freshman year in college is where you meet all of your friends for the most part. That's where the bonds are formed. And because I was only going to lectures at this point, I wasn't able to make any friends. Around that time, I was also experiencing some pain and I started going to chiropractors with my mom. We also both had some pretty severe GI issues. I was getting really bad acid reflux and heartburn. My mom and I both got endoscopies together, and basically my doctors put me on Pepcid and said, that should solve the problem. So one thing I had dealt with for my entire life up until that point was insomnia that was getting worse and worse. I remember in high school just feeling like I had never gotten a good night's sleep. It would take me about an hour to 2 hours to fall asleep every night. I would get a few hours of sleep and then wake up again at 5:45 or 6. Again, I truly thought everyone just couldn't sleep, and I thought it was kind of normal, so it's not something that I ever really brought up to anyone. In 2010, when I turned 20, I got a job as a cocktail waitress at a bar in Union Square, and that's when my back pain started. My back and my legs would be killing me, and at one point, I remember I did ask a coworker, I was just like, do you guys feel this pain too? Like, how is everyone pushing through this? And she looked at me and she was like, I'm not in pain. And that's when I started realizing, like, maybe some of this is not as normal as I thought it was. I just pushed through the pain, and it was absolutely excruciating. I did it for several years. So eventually I realized that I couldn't stay in the service industry. It was just far too painful for me. So I quit that and I started working some desk jobs. First, I was an executive assistant to a commercial director, and then I got a job as a studio manager, but I started experiencing a lot of pain then too. And I realized that sitting down all day was also really hurting my back. Throughout my 20s, I experienced a lot of like hip clicking, hip popping, and then my hip started getting stuck. My leg would just like lock, and I could not move it from the hip joint. I couldn't move it back, and I couldn't really move it forward. It was just stuck. My hip would get like locked in. Eventually I got hip surgery for that in 2019, but I experienced that for a long time. Just because this video could use a little bit of lightening up, I'm gonna drop in some hilarious clips of me after my hip surgery that make me laugh every time I watch them.
Oh no. Ooh, gross.
What did you watch? What made you cry? Was it surgery? No, it wasn't surgery. What'd you watch?
Brittany runs a marathon.
It was so good.
I had a big day.
Did you run a marathon today?
I took a shower.
At the same time I was having all of this pain and these hip issues and all of the GI stuff and the insomnia, I started getting some really bad POTS episodes. So here are a few examples of some POTS stories and what a POTS episode looks like for me. In 2017, I was at an art gallery, and all of a sudden I started feeling like the blood had drained from my body. It turns out it kind of did. Felt really sick, really clammy, really lightheaded, felt really nauseous, didn't know what was happening, so I immediately called a lift. I walked outside and I kind of leaned against the wall. When the lift pulled up, I took a couple steps and all of a sudden, bam, I hit the concrete and I woke up with my head underneath a parked car and my body on the sidewalk. I went to the hospital and did every blood test, every test under the sun, whatever heart tests they could do when I was there, and they found absolutely nothing. Now I know that was from my POTS, or my postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome. Basically with POTS, your blood pools in your lower body, which means your upper body can't get enough blood. That includes your pituitary gland, which makes your hormones, and your brain, which is why people with POTS experience a lot of brain fog and a lot of fatigue. And all three of these diseases can cause severe fatigue. So I basically have fatigue on fatigue on fatigue. Okay, so this is a story I have to share about a POTS episode just because it's hilarious. And I think this video is like downer enough that it needs a little bit of a funny story. So this is a picture of me after a POTS episode. I didn't know it was POTS at the time, of course. This was years and years and years ago. Before I had that whole fainting incident where my face hit the curb and everything. This actually might have been one of my first ever fainting episodes. I was on a first date with the guy who took this picture. We met up in LA. He was an actor. He thought it would be fun to do all these stereotypical LA things. So we got like green smoothies. We then went to this vitamin IV place. We thought it would be fun to get like a B12 drip. I don't know. I just wanted to go with the flow, and not my ideal choice of a date activity, but when in Rome. So the technician did the IV wrong and there was blood everywhere. And I looked down and hit the floor. I woke up and there's my date and there's like two nurses standing above me. I'm on the floor. I think I puked in the garbage can. And I didn't remember until I was going through my phone looking for photos for this video that the date actually took a picture of me passed out in the chair. This was after I had fainted on the floor. And at this point I was kind of like coming to in the chair. I actually think he asked me on a second date, which is rather surprising. So moral of the story, don't date actors. In 2018, I think I was squatting with just two 20-pound weights. It wasn't even that heavy. And I felt a pop in my lower back. Didn't feel any pain. Things seemed okay. And then the next morning I woke up and I could not lift my head. I couldn't move. I was in such severe back pain. And that lasted for several months. I think it was probably about a week of not really being able to walk, but the pain never went away. And I still experience that pain every single day, including right now as I'm sitting here. That was when I first started going to doctors and started putting together the pieces slowly but surely, one by one, that there might be something more systemically wrong. And so I constantly feel tension and pain everywhere, which also brings on more fatigue. Despite the best back doctors at USC and Stanford, no one was really able to figure out what was wrong with me except for arthritis, joint degeneration, spinal stenosis, and a herniated disc. I saw pain management specialists. Basically, they said I can take pain medication, I can wear an SI belt that kind of helps keep my joints in place, and ultimately I'm just gonna have to learn to do things differently. And that was so bad that every other symptom I had been experiencing just kind of fell to the wayside because I just was in so much pain every single day. So now I want to talk a little bit about what it's like to have an invisible illness in an able-bodied world. And I have to preface these clips by saying I am mostly functional. My case is mild compared to how a lot of people have EDS, mast cell activation, and POTS. Some people pass out 7 times a day. Some people are on feeding tubes. Some people are wheelchair bound. I'm very lucky to have a mild case. So as I go into all of the challenges that I've faced in my life, again, I'm just always afraid of the judgment that people are gonna think I'm just complaining. You know, they see me at the grocery store, or they might see me at a concert one day and think, oh, well, she looks fine. What's she talking about? And it's that internalized ableism that makes me feel always very, very scared to share my story because I want to share the challenges. I want people out there who also have a mild case of these diseases to feel like there's someone out there who understands what they're going through. And everything in life is relative. We all just have our own human experiences. So I want to share my perspective of someone who feels really stuck in between disability and able-bodied. I just feel like I'm somewhere in the middle and I have no sense of identity and I feel like I don't fit in any community. And people in the chronic illness community have told me that that is internalized ableism. And so that's something that I'm working on letting go of. But especially when you share your life on social media, that judgment that you get from other people, especially anytime I complain about something in life, it's really triggering for a lot of people. I wanted to add the disclaimer that I am by no means comparing myself to other people. I'm not saying I have it the hardest out of anyone else in the world, but I just want to share what it's like to live with an invisible illness where you look like you're functional, but inside you are really struggling. And for me, I really struggle with this sense of shame of living in between those two worlds. For example, something that would be really helpful for me when I'm having a bad flare-up is to have a handicap pass on my car or an ADA access at concerts. But I just worry that if I have a handicap license and I get out of my car and I look totally fine and I'm not walking with a limp, people will judge me and they'll think I'm taking advantage of a system. But there are some days when I'm having a bad flare-up where I really do need that handicap spot because walking is so exhausting and painful for me. It's like the number one worst thing I can do. Any kind of having to walk long distances, especially if there are any kind of hills involved, it's brutal. I just really worry that people will judge me for that. And I feel a sense of shame about even wanting it in the first place. For example, actually, after I filmed the original clips of this video, we went to a festival in LA for 2 days. And I did all of the things I had to do to make sure it was gonna be a good day. I stayed horizontal on the couch all day, theragunning, pounding my electrolytes, eating the foods that nourish my body and make me feel really good. I didn't drink the entire weekend because alcohol is a trigger. Anytime I go to a festival, I basically can only give myself a few hours of a window before I get too exhausted. So I can never go early in the day. And now that my POTS is getting worse, I also can't go when it's really hot out. So when you have these illnesses, you make all of these really strategic, calculated adjustments so that you can have an okay time. And what ended up happening is I had emailed the festival and asked about ADA access. I thought, okay, great. If I can have access to some kind of seat in the concert and I can sit in case I pass out or if I need to reserve my energy so that I can then stand up for a song, you know, maybe that would be great for me. I walk up to the ADA line and in front of me is a guy in a wheelchair. And I'm just like, you stupid bitch. Like, how could you possibly stand in this ADA line? Like, you are so selfish. And I get emotional thinking about it because I just, yeah, I feel so, I don't know, so stuck in between these two worlds. Like I don't see myself and the world doesn't see me as disabled, but I don't fit in comfortably with able-bodied society, and it's like this very tough identity shift that I'm playing out in my mind right now. And the reason for the majority of the struggle is because in the past year specifically, my symptoms have gotten significantly worse. So that's why these feelings are kind of more and more at the forefront lately. And of course, there are people with much more severe illnesses and disabilities, and I just wonder, like, if I have access to ADA, am I taking away from a spot for one of those people? So I'm just very morally conflicted right now. Again, my chronic illness friends have shared that that's internalized ableism, and so that's something that I'm gonna have to work on myself. But if you are someone who's kind of having that same experience, I wanted to just mention it and be transparent and raw and vulnerable so that you don't feel alone in that struggle. And that is a perfect segue into how this has affected my social life. And it's affected it dramatically in ways I'm not even fully understanding really until just now. First of all, you realize who the fuck shows up for you. Like, in having gotten this diagnosis, 2 of my friends, and John of course, went above and beyond to make me feel validated and understood and to try to understand my illnesses. On the flip side, you realize who doesn't show up for you as well. And that has been painful with a few of my friendships, people who know that I'm struggling with this. I'm very open about it online, on social media, and they haven't reached out. And that is, to me, the universe's way of making space for me to bring in the good people in my life and leave out the bad. This diagnosis has given me so much clarity about the people that I want in my life and the people that showed up for me. Some of the people who haven't been there for me are shocking, and it really rocked me to my core, but it has really helped me realize who cares for me and who doesn't. And honestly, I'm grateful for that clarity. And as I also reflect specifically on past experiences and relationships with people, I think one of the ways that an invisible illness has really affected me is in person and on camera, I can come across as really low energy. So for example, today I'm feeling really good. As you notice in this clip, I have a lot of energy, but in the clip that I was filming earlier, I was having a flare up and I was really, really struggling to talk. And so that can come across, especially on camera, as disinterested, negative, low energy. People online have called me too slow. And that translates also into individual relationships and past experiences in my life. For example, not having a diagnosis meant that I didn't really feel comfortable voicing when I was uncomfortable and when I was in pain, when I needed to go to bed, when I couldn't do an activity all the other friends were doing. I've just felt so isolated in these challenges and in these internal struggles. You know, obviously, especially when I'm dealing with friends who I'm not super close with, that's when it's the worst. And on the flip side, having a diagnosis means really feeling so much more empowered to say, hey, you know what? I actually can't do that. My doctor says I shouldn't do that. Hey, you know what? I gotta go to bed. I'm sorry. If I don't sleep well, I'm gonna be paying for it for the next 3 days. Having this diagnosis is such a huge validation, not just to me internally, but in ways that I can express myself to the outside world. And because previously, since all of my symptoms weren't severe in terms of how these disorders can be, and all of these symptoms didn't usually happen at one time, I've always just been like kinda sick, kinda in pain, kinda out of it, but just with it enough to be able to function. And so that's made it really, really hard to sort of push through social situations where I probably come across as disinterested or really low energy when in my mind, I'm just distracted thinking about how much fucking pain I'm in. Because I was able to somewhat function, there was also this battle of like wanting to push through and wanting to prove to myself that I can do it, which is also an example of internalized ableism. You know, just wanting to say like, push through, you can do this, you're an adult, put your big girl pants on. When in reality, it turns out I actually had like 3 genetic diseases and I really needed to rest and I should have listened to my body. And so having the diagnosis now really is so empowering to make the choices and the decisions and vocalize what I need. Another weird way that these disorders have affected me is really limited my ability to travel. I'm the kind of person who just wants to see the whole world and have always dreamt of traveling. I mean, I've watched every episode of Anthony Bourdain like 3 times, but unfortunately because of the way that food and changes to my environment and just the energy that it takes to travel and to go on vacations, it's just really limited what I can do with my life, and I feel really emotionally impacted by that. I haven't been able to accomplish the things I wanted to accomplish. I haven't been able to see the places I want to see. And so you can see that looking at all of these symptoms, looking at all of these adjustments that I have to make to my life when I'm just going about my day or to my home, you can see how from the outside perspective, it might look like I'm extremely high maintenance. In fact, people have called me that throughout my entire life. Like, you know, family members being like, wow, you need to sleep with blackout shades, earplugs, a noise machine. You're so sensitive to cold and heat, you have to have things at certain temperatures. Those are things that really hurt to hear over and over again, especially when you know that there's nothing you can do about it. You're not high maintenance just because you're high maintenance. And that's why the validation of a diagnosis is so important, because I can say, no, I'm actually not high maintenance, I just have a disease. This obviously sounds like a really trivial thing to complain about, but if you see me, you see my huge suitcase when I'm going somewhere for like 4 or 5 days, but what you don't see is that suitcase is filled with about 100 pills. It's filled with a huge Theragun, all of the different physical therapy bands I have to bring with me, my noise machine, my SI belt, my compression socks, and all the other shit that I need to bring with me just to function. And those are the very insidious ways that feedback from the external world makes it really tough on you when you have an invisible illness, because you look a certain way to the world. You look high maintenance, you look low energy, you look disinterested, but actually you have a fucking disease. And having a chronic and invisible illness also really affects your very close relationships. So if I think about my relationship with John, who I've been with for over 7 years, there are times when I ask him to do things that would be really easy to an able-bodied person. But it'll be a day when I have half a spoon left in my energy tank. And he doesn't know that. He doesn't get it, because I look like this. I look fine, but I am barely hanging on by a thread, and my entire body is lit up with pain. My muscles feel rock hard. My stomach is in knots. I feel nauseous. I have no energy. I'm having a hard time putting sentences together, and I feel really lightheaded. But that's what it's like to live in my body like every other day. And my flare-ups are really unpredictable. So a lot of times it does cause contention in my relationship, where John has to remember, oh, right, like, she is asking me this not because she's being lazy, because she has a chronic illness. And changing that for the people around you is really difficult, but it does get better when you have a diagnosis. And it's something that I also have to work on with my communication. And so instead of just asking John to do something, I will say, hey, would you mind just grabbing the grocery bags from the car? Like, that really took it out of me, and I just have to rest for a moment. So, you know, he has to be better about really understanding my perspective, and I have to be better about voicing what it's like to be in my body on a daily basis. 2 nights ago, John asked, how are you doing? How are you feeling? I broke down in tears, and I told him I was in so much pain, and I have really been struggling with the side effects of my medication, and I'm just feeling like I'm really behind, and I'm in my 30s, and I feel like I've barely accomplished anything I've wanted to accomplish, and I feel scared about the future, and I just broke down hysterically crying. And he was so shocked, because he told me he forgot that I lived in pain every day, and it's just so normal I don't even voice it. In your head, you kind of assume that people know what's going on with you, but they really don't unless you vocalize what you're feeling. I've also had to permanently give up yoga. Just for your knowledge, if you have type 3 EDS or know someone who has it, yoga is one of the worst things you can possibly do. In yoga, you do all these really bendy things, and if you have hypermobile EDS, pushing your joints past that normal limit is really bad for you, and that causes further injury. And so my doctors have told me that I have to give up yoga for the rest of my life, and yoga was one of my favorite things in the world. It's also really difficult to work when you have these disorders, because all 3 of the ones I have cause fatigue. It takes like so much energy just to like stay on track and stay focused and not distracted. There's always something flaring up in my mind, you know, whether it's pain in my back and my SI, or my knees or my hips, or it's my GI issues, or I'm just so tired, or I'm nauseous, or I have brain fog. There's always some symptom that's in my head kind of popping up in any conversation that I'm having. It can just be very difficult to push through, and the more you push through, the more energy you consume, and then the more energy you kind of take away from the next day. I'm sure that some of those stories and examples sounded maybe trivial to some, like, oh, boo-hoo, you can't travel. But really, there's a huge emotional impact when you can't do the things that you love. When you feel that your body is a prison, it changes everything. It changes the way you interact with the world. Coupled with the fact that I have significant emotional trauma in my life, there have been a lot of challenges that I've had to overcome, and that can really affect the way that I come across, the way that I'm perceived. And it becomes this huge struggle where it just feels like every day is a dark cloud when you have to deal with this. You start losing hope. You start losing that excitement for the next day. So now that I have this diagnosis, I'm starting to get some answers. I'm starting to get put on medications and treatments and get testing done. I do finally have, a little bit of a light at the end of the tunnel where maybe one day I'll be symptom free. Maybe one day I'll be able to go spend a whole day at a museum. I mean, I've never been able to do that before. Maybe one day I'll actually be able to go to Coachella and be there for the whole day instead of waiting until the temperature drops so I don't pass out. Maybe one day I'll have energy in a day and I can knock everything off my to-do list and I can learn new skills without feeling too exhausted by the end of the day to really try something new. I'm working really hard on trying to be positive and try to express gratitude for what I do have and for the things that my body does give me. And through that work, I'm hoping I can one day feel free. It's only been a month since I've had my diagnosis, and this is the kind of thing where your emotions are just like bing bong, bing bong. You're all over the place. 1 second you're feeling really hopeful and you feel good and there's progress, and the next second you feel sick and you can't do anything and you feel like you're literally wasting your life away. And so again, I hope this video doesn't minimize the experiences of people with severe disabilities and diseases. I just wanted to share my perspective of having a somewhat more mild case and sharing that kind of weird middle ground that I feel stuck in case it helps other people feel a little bit less alone. So let's talk about how I'm feeling. On one hand, I'm feeling like super validated. Like I've known my whole life that something was wrong, that it just wasn't normal. Like even though all of the symptoms didn't seem crippling enough or severe enough to really mean that something systemic was going on, it didn't make sense that I had all these symptoms. It just felt like humans were not supposed to live like this. Especially in talking to other people, it just more and more didn't make sense, and yet doctors never really listened. I do blame the healthcare and medical system in general for taking me 32 years to understand what was going wrong with my body. I have had to aggressively advocate for myself. I have told doctors, I'm like, frankly, you're wrong and I'm not gonna see you again because you're not doing your job. I was diagnosed with fibromyalgia. That was not right. I told them, you're wrong. There's something else going on here. They didn't listen to me, so I got a new doctor. So if you're someone who's struggling with a similar story and your doctors just aren't listening to you, or they're not putting the pieces together, or maybe you're diagnosed with something and it just doesn't feel right to you, keep looking. Find doctors that will listen. You know in your gut if something's wrong. And if it's wrong, then you need to keep pushing to find the right answer. So the overwhelming emotion that I feel right now is a sense of validation. When I first got the diagnosis a week ago, I was feeling such a weight off my shoulders. I was feeling relief. I was feeling hope for the first time. I mean, relief knowing that I didn't have to keep searching for answers anymore. I didn't have to keep doing the math in my head to try to put all the pieces together to see what the puzzle ended up looking like. And also a sense of hope that maybe one day I might not actually feel like this anymore. Maybe one day my symptoms might be managed, and that hope has totally given me a new lease on life. However, I'm now into the phase of grief and being completely overwhelmed. And I'm wondering what my life would have been like if I had found out earlier. I'm wondering what my life would have been like if I had had doctors who really cared about me and really wanted to help. I kind of feel like I was robbed. I wonder what my friendships would have been like if I had had more energy to hang out with people, So many times I've told people that I couldn't go out because I had other plans when really I was just too tired and I wasn't feeling well. I wonder what my life would look like right now if I'd had the ability to focus more and sleep better in school. I wonder all the different activities I missed out on. I can't hike, I can't run, I can't do CrossFit, I had to give up yoga. I'm at the point in my life where my favorite activity in the world is going to concerts, and I can barely stand just for the entirety of a concert at this point. I wonder what my life would have looked like if I had been able to do all the things that I wanted to do. Traveling, for example, is so exhausting, and whenever you're out of your home environment, it just throws you for a loop. And that includes throwing every cell in my body out of whack because I'm in a different environment. I just wonder what my life could have been like and all the things I could have done if I didn't have this. But I do feel really hopeful that one day I'll get to the place where maybe I'm symptom-free or I have minimal symptoms. And I'm also still really grateful that my case is a lot more mild compared to a lot of people who have severe diseases. And so while I have that hope, I also am processing grief, knowing that these are diseases that are lifelong and they're progressive, meaning they get worse with time. It's been hard to think about the future and what my life might look like when these do get worse. There's grief in thinking about how that might impact John, in the future as my partner. And I think most importantly, there's grief knowing that these diseases are genetic, and if I have kids, I have a 50-50 shot of giving it to them. And that brings up a lot of fear. I do have a little bit of information about this and genetics and passing this on to kids. So EDS is genetic. And if you don't know, in February, I came off of hormonal birth control to prepare to freeze my embryos with John. So I had a conversation with my fertility doctor today, and she advised me to put a brief pause on embryo freezing for a few reasons. Luckily, none of my supplements or medication interact with the embryo freezing process, so I wouldn't start any of the topical testosterone. I think that I'll talk about later in terms of my treatment plan. I wouldn't do that. They've advised against freezing my embryos and then going back later and doing a biopsy on the embryos because it puts a lot of stress on the embryos, and you want the best shot you've got when you are going through the IVF process. So she said that if that genetic marker is going to come out within the next year or so, it would be better to wait so that they can do the genetic testing before they freeze the embryos so it doesn't put more stress on the embryos. So there is a little bit of good news surrounding advancements for hypermobile EDS. I'm gonna talk about the spoon theory. So according to the spoon theory, you have 12 spoons per day. Each activity that you perform requires a certain number of spoons, whether it's getting up and making coffee, taking a shower, going grocery shopping, working, etc. Some activities, such as brushing your teeth or getting dressed, might only use 1 spoon. However, it could take more spoons to do other things, such as preparing and eating a meal or traveling to work. So in the end, there are only a set number of spoons or energy available to you each day. You can go past the set number of spoons in a day, but then you'll be pulling from them in the next day when you start with fewer spoons. So this metaphor is used to explain chronic illness to people who don't know what it's like. Basically, you have a limited amount of energy each day, and you have to make choices as to which activities you're gonna undertake. For example, if I'm gonna walk my dog Thumper, then I'm not gonna be able to go grocery shopping. So I can only do a certain amount of activities every day before I'm exhausted and in pain. So that's the spoon theory. I have a really intense and overwhelming treatment plan. I have a lot of tests I have to go through. I have basically 6 out of 11 symptoms that align with having a CSF leak, which is a cerebral spinal fluid leak. I have to get a ton of MRIs of the brain, my upper body, my whole lumbar spine, my lower back, my hips, everything. My doctor's also found a nodule on my thyroid, so I have to get an ultrasound for that. So far, there have been about 12 flags on my blood work for abnormal levels. Once I go through all of the tests I have to get done, and I start basically like 4 phases of medications and supplements. That also includes wearing an Aspen neck brace, which might help with some of my neurological symptoms, I have to start wearing compression socks and compression leggings to try to bring the blood back up to my upper body and my brain, which might help with my brain fog and my fatigue. I have to start taping my knees to hold my kneecaps in place. I have to get orthotics made to put in all of my shoes. I have to start getting prolotherapy injections into my knees, my hips, and my SI joints. A lot of people find relief with prolotherapy. However, it can take like a lot of treatments to get to the point where you find relief. You know, one of my followers shared with me that she had had over 30 prolotherapy injections, and it is very expensive. You basically have to be bedridden for like 5 days afterwards because it can be so painful, and you have to go through several rounds of that. My doctor wants me to fly out to Colorado to get those injections. I have to do a sleep study because my doctor thinks I have sleep apnea. She also thinks that the EDS has caused like a smaller airway so that I have trouble breathing. I have to go to a cardiologist and get an echocardiogram. I have to start taking about 10,000 milligrams of salt every day to increase my blood pressure. I have to go on a low histamine diet, no dairy, no gluten, no alcohol, no eggs, no beef, no spinach, no tomatoes, avocado, no grains except for quinoa and rice. It's not great. It's not very fun. With these diseases, your body is not able to absorb all of the nutrients it gets, which is why a lot of people with these diseases have malnutrition. So I have to take like a really high dose of things like vitamin C, quercetin, probiotics, vitamin D, vitamin B, like 100 vitamins on the list. I have to find a combination of histamine blockers and also like acid reflux medications that work for me, and then take those at a high dose. They're gonna start me on ketotifen on phase 2. They might need to start me on topical testosterone. And they did just start me on a DAO enzyme. I can't remember what it stands for or what it does. You take it before every meal, like 5 minutes before you eat, and I think it helps with the histamine. And then they also started me on low dose naltrexone. Naltrexone at higher doses is used to treat opioid addiction and alcoholism. Basically, it binds to the opioid receptors in the brain and the endorphin receptors in the brain, so that if you drink alcohol or you take opioids, you can't feel any sense of euphoria. Interestingly enough, at low doses, it is used for patients with cancer, MS, and diseases like mine to reduce pain and inflammation. And I've heard from a lot of you that low-dose naltrexone was like a miracle drug that changed your life. So I'm really excited about that. I did take low-dose naltrexone for 2 days prior to this. I had crippling side effects. I have been like severely fatigued to the point where I've been bedridden. I was super nauseous. I kept gagging. I was so weak. I could barely lift my head. I could barely lift my arms. So my doctor's gonna drop my dose and start me at 0.25 milligrams instead of the 1.5 I was on. And every few days, then I'm gonna work my way up to about 4.5. I have about 100 other stories and thoughts to share with you. I could talk about this all day, but I think this video has gone on long enough. If you have any questions, I'm totally happy to answer anything in the comment section below. Check the description box. I will leave a list of gear and supplements and books and podcasts and things that have really helped not just me in healing and understanding this, but also helped family members understand what I'm going through. So definitely check out the description box. My heart goes out to all my fellow Spoonies, and if you made it this far, I really appreciate you. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.